where are you located right now?
Hi, Jessica. I'm in London. It's good
You're
to
in
be here.
London. Back to our different time zones. I am in Eugene, Oregon, in the Willamette Valley, near the Oregon wineries. So we have to kind of talk about that too. So right now
Yeah.
we'll get started, and we're going to ask Mattia a lot of questions today about his business and his broadcast. So Time to Wine is a live broadcast that is on the second and fourth Monday of the month at 9 a.m. Pacific Standard Time in Eugene, Oregon, or the Oregon time zone. The live stream interview is the first and third Friday of the month at 11 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. Mattia Scarpazza is a proficient sommelier, wine writer, globetrotter. He achieved his WSETDiploma, which drives him to produce articles and start his own podcast looking into wine. So we're going to find out a little bit about that today. So Mattia, can you tell us about your work history and your background?
Well, I started when I was in Italy working I was actually a baker, and then I used to work in the weekends in a wine shop. There was a friend of my father, and I used to go there at the weekend, help him out, and sorting out. It was mostly sorting out the shelves, and then I sort of got into the loving wine. And then when I was younger, I used to go with my grandfather around the Piedmont picking up cases of wine, and he's always been a savvy drinker and a lover of wine. So that was when I was like 4 or 5. And then I think my career really started when I was in London. Moving from Italy to London, I seen some different opportunities. I started working in a restaurant, and I then was interested in spirits. I'd done some courses, and I worked a little bit in a bar. And when I moved here, and I was like, okay, I really like the wine. And I started there, and I started working as an assistant sommelier, and then grew to assistant sommelier and sommelier to head sommelier now.
Oh, great. Okay, so talk a little bit about your position at Petersham Nurseries and what do you do? I know you do a wine list with Italian wines. So talk about that.
Yeah, so I mean, the Petersham Nurseries is a restaurant in the southwestern London, and it's been open for 15 years. And we specialize in Italian wine. The list is solely Italian wines. We have about 180 wines on the list. We go from very small niche producers to the more mainstream winery, but we do like organic, and the people who are interested, producer are interested in their where they come from and their history. We're interested in selling these producers, and that's the ethos of the whole nursery. We are a small independent restaurant, but we have such a big influence in London. We're set inside an actual nursery for plants, so there are plants everywhere, and nature takes controls over everything in the restaurant, and it's a unique setting. So I think the restaurant has strike golden with that.
So what are your favorite Italian wines? Do you have favorites? Mattia?
I can't say I have a favorite. I have been plenty of time to the Barolo regions. And I think that's always, if I don't know what to drink, I always leaning towards Barolo because there's something comforting in it. So yeah, I think Barolo is my sort of comfort wine, something I want to go back to often.
Where are you from in Italy? What city?
I'm near Varese, so in the northeast of Italy, between the lakes, between Lake Garda and Lake Lugano. So I'm not far from actually Barolo. It's like just a couple of hour drives, and I have most of my friends now in Piedmont, so I go there and visit them, and then we go around the wineries, which is not so bad.
Yeah, and so now you're in London?
Yeah,
where are you located? Yeah, okay, you're in London. Okay, so I know you have your Dipset diploma, and you had a long process through that, and then you started your podcast because you were studying and learning and then wanted to get a little deeper into the whole subject. So do you want to talk a little bit about your Dipset and how you achieved that and what was involved?
Yeah, I mean, the WSET took me about 3 years to complete the diploma, plus another 3 years, so 2.5 years to do the level 2 and the level 3. yeah, I mean, the diploma was such a good experience for me. It really opened up the idea of what wine actually is, why certain style exists, why a lot of I discovered a lot of the whys behind wine, which was very fascinating. And then I was really fascinated about the whole winemaking and viticulture, which was something that I strive to speak a lot on my podcast, because I think is a very vital part of the whole understanding about wine. I think if once understand about viticulture and winemaking, that the principle that can be applied in many wine regions, and those principles that make easier to understand why certain areas are just producing certain wines and so on and so forth. So for me, it's very, I'm keen and learning about, at the moment, I'm learning a bit about the chemistry of wine. I got a couple of books on it, and I'm thinking to take a small 3 days course on chemistry, wine chemistry, on all these things, which is fascinating and it's interesting.
I think it's interesting too. And I had found out in Oregon, there was at Linfield College, there was a wine program that was fairly inexpensive, that was very intensive into viticulture and these kinds of things for people that wanted to learn more about wine. I thought it was actually an academic program, but it was actually something you go to 2 nights a week, and you could learn more about viticulture and about the soil and the farming processes.
Yeah.
And it sounded really interesting. So, okay, we've talked a little bit about COVID, which has been, most of us have not gone through a global pandemic in our lifetimes. So it's been quite interesting for all of us. So talk a little bit about some of your mental health tips during COVID, and I can tell you some of mine too.
Yeah, I mean, COVID was, for me, it was sort of an interesting part of my journey, because obviously when I was doing I was starting to look at my my podcast, and during the time of the quarantines and the lockdowns, I had the time to develop it, and so for me it was sort of a good time to explore and learn about this. But then, obviously, because I was busy and doing all my researches, I wanted to make sure I do also some of the physical part, and make sure my mental health was up to standard, because obviously coming from busy services and doing a lot of walking every day, to sitting down in front of my laptop for a good 8 hours, it was very important for me to try to do something. So I taken on with my fiance to do yoga. So I must say she has been doing more consistent than me, but I really enjoyed it. I think it was it was a fantastic discipline, and both physically and mentally. And then I started doing meditation, which I still do now after the lockdowns. I started before the lockdowns and the pandemic, but during the pandemic, I really focused on it, and I could see the benefits, and I continue to do it that every morning. And yeah, it's a good mindset.
I did. I actually, when COVID started, as you know, well, in the United States, I don't know what happened in Europe. In the United States, it was suddenly this big fear of, you can't leave your house, you're not supposed to talk to your family, don't touch anyone. We were washing our groceries, don't go to the grocery store. It was just this huge fearful situation right in the beginning. And so I started meditating, and I meditate twice per day. I meditate in the morning and I meditate in the evening. But I found, one of the things I found through meditation was I wasn't particularly fearful about COVID, or I didn't feel that we were in the apocalypse. However, in Oregon, we had a bunch of fires shortly after, and the sky turned orange and everything was on fire. That was a little alarming. That was so COVID and then not breathing together was a little concerning to me.
Wow.
So, okay. So, what would you say some of the silver linings of COVID are?
Well, for me, it was doing my podcast and being able to spend instead of 5 or 6 hours a week, spending 8-9 hours a day, and I really put down my foot. And I mean, my fiance worked from home, so I couldn't really. So I was basically doing office hours with her and sitting down. She would start at 8 o'clock and finish at 5, and was doing my hours there in front of the laptop, researching about how podcasts work and how to marketing and all these sort of researches and what I wanted to do with it. So that for me was a silver lining. And also we were able to do a bit of sports. So I picked up again cycling, which thankfully I bought a bicycle a few months before during the summer, the previous years, and so I sort of pick up cycling, and I did a bit more cycling than I would have normally done. So that was good, and obviously spending more time at home with my girlfriend and being able to see her every day. That was definitely different than a usual partner. Yeah, a different part routine, and then we used to have me working in the evening and she working during the day, so that was good.
Well, we here, I think one of the things I did was the gym was closed. So I was going to the gym part of the time, and then the gym would close and the gym would open. So I started walking. So I was walking about 25,000 steps a day. And then I think also most of us were not accustomed to being with our partners or families 24 hours a day. So that was kind of an interesting thing there. And I would say some of the silver linings have been, I saw a lot of families. So for example, there was a lot of commercialism with shopping and what do families do. I saw a lot of families at home doing puzzles and doing projects in the backyard and cleaning the house and cleaning the garage and doing a lot of activities together, which was nice to see people moving back toward families and moving back toward relationships as opposed to doing their own things by themselves. So let's talk a little bit about, I want to ask you, so what did you see on your side in Europe with COVID in terms of, I know Italy, a lot of the European cities, people are very close together. And so it seems like when it started, there was a big problem in Italy, and then it started rolling, to the United States, and the United States soared up. But talk a little bit about what you saw on your side.
Well, for me, obviously, I'm in London, and Italy has been sort of where it started in Europe, and UK was it's always been like 3 weeks behind rest of mainland Europe. So they started in Italy, in Milan, so it wasn't really far from where I was from. The first sort of hotspots that were there. And so Italy was already on lockdown for like a couple of weeks. In London, it wasn't. So I was sort of listening to my parents being in lockdown, and here we weren't sure yet. My father gave me some tips about don't do all your chores right now, because in the first week, otherwise by second week you don't have anything to do. So that that was that. But then something happened, because every time then Italy has been okay, then England it was sort of suffering, and it's been happening for the last 2 years. So effectively I haven't been able to go back to Italy since December 2019, because every time I tried to book a flight, it was either Italy going in lockdown or having problems, or UK having problems. And now hopefully I'll be able to go back on the 12th, but for July after 2 years, so that would be good.
And my husband's from South America, so I have a Brazilian husband, and we weren't able to go to Brazil, and he finally went, and he wrote me and said, no one's wearing masks and there's no social distancing, and I think I need to get out of here. So let's talk a little bit. Okay, we're going to talk about your podcast that's going really well. So let's talk about your Looking Into Wine podcast. And I would agree. I also was working 50 hours a week on my social media, and the same thing was a silver lining for me. So tell me about your podcast, and who are you interviewing, and how's it going?
Well, the podcast it started in July last year, and I think I personally had a blast doing it and interviewing and meeting all these amazing people around the industry. So the whole idea was for me after my diploma 2 years ago. I didn't know what to do, and I was looking to do writing and more journalist per se. But then I sort of my big things has always been about talking and questioning, and I was being good conversation. So I wanted to. My girlfriend actually said, "Why don't you try to do a podcast?" So I started looking into it, and I listened more podcasts, and I decided, well, this sounds something like I can do up my street, and I definitely would enjoy. So then I start thinking, what would I like to do with it, and then basically the whole idea is. Those are all topics that then we talk. I talk in the podcast is all topics that I found that fascinating during the diploma, or topics that then I wish I learned more about. So I'm going around the world virtually, looking for expert to speak to about these topics, and I have a list of topics I want to cover for each season, and I go around looking for the who is the best person to go and answer all the questions I have about these topics. And I had book authors from masters of wine to specialists in Canadian wines to some of the people I interviewed, they are like working at universities or chemistry. So it's very varied. Every episode is different. I try to focus on a single topic for like 30 minutes and explore it and try to give as much value for me as the interview, but also for the listeners. I think that's my big thing. I want to give values to the listeners. I want them to learn about something while they listen to a podcast. So yeah, that's the idea.
And I think it's a great way to meet people and meet friends, and it's also a wonderful way to learn. I'm finding.
Yeah.
Do you find that too?
Yeah, no, I'm learning a lot, not only because I'm researching the topic I'm talking about, but also while the experts or the guests I have on the show, they explain them in such a easy and easy to understand and clear way, because they've been repeating it for years and they know exactly what they're talking about. So it's such a pleasure to just listen to them and the way they explain it, and I can see the passions and where they talk, and it's very rewarding.
So, how do you think podcasting has changed? Do you see change?
Well, for me, yeah, it gave me definitely something to be proud about, because I am really proud of the product I'm doing, and I definitely have something to speak to people, and it gives me the confidence to go about and connecting to people. But also the idea, then if I found something interesting, I want to have them on the show. So I'm always out and about and reading and listening to other podcasts and looking for ideas of other who could come on the show and what topics should I listen to. And also some of them are regulars. I have the fun always been listening to the podcast, that they end up being on the guest for the next season.
Well, so yes. So what I wanted to ask you, so your topics, are they predominantly, do you stick with wine and viticulture, or what are your topics that you choose?
Yeah, they are mostly related to wine. I speak about viticulture, winemaking, and wine regions mostly. I also did cover some of like specific grape variety, how it grows. How I did an episode on ferment in Hungary, how it grows, what is the style it produces, the history of this grape in Hungary, which was very fascinating. It's one of the leading grape of Hungary, so it was very interesting to listen to it and did it go, and where is it going, and yeah, that's something. But the topic varies. I don't want to have a specific topic. I like to keep it broad and having interesting people every time, an interesting topic, always related to wine, obviously.
And mine is interesting because I can switch back and forth. So I can switch over to, well, like yours, for example, we're talking about podcast, but I can switch over to social media or marketing or leadership or those kinds of things. So I kind of go back and forth. So I learn a lot about all topics. So how do you go about marketing? Well, first of all, I wanted to ask you about the podcast. I'm doing a live stream and I can talk about the cost of this and what goes on, but how much does it cost to start a podcast? And do you find it to be difficult or do you find it to be, I'm sorry, is
No,
it,
no,
is it hard to start it? Is it,
no.
what is the learning curve?
Well, it takes some learning at especially beginning to understand how to put your podcast in each of the sort of listening area from Spotify, iTunes, and iHeart Music or Pandora. But then, I mean, it is not very difficult, and definitely the running costs are lower so than doing a YouTube channel, which you would have to have cameras, especially now with YouTube being so popular, you would have to have super professional equipment. Whereas in podcast now, you still really find in all sorts of things. You find the people from. For me, it was getting an audio interface, something I could bring around. So it was a Zoom audio interface and a couple of microphones. And then that was my sort of starting point where I wanted to, because I wanted to go to places and interview people. And then the pandemic started, so I had to do all online. But yeah, that's where I'm trying to go for the next seasons. But yeah, the it's not difficult, but I think it's not as easy as a YouTube, where you upload it on YouTube and the algorithm push it around. Here, you would have to have a product. I use Spreaker, which is similar to like Buzzsprout, or there are plenty out there. So basically, you upload there, and then is the place that creates the file, the digital file, which is uploaded to the different platforms. So it's more centralized. You control it there, and then you spread all over the world.
Yeah, and this has worked really well. I'm like you. I'd like to go out and interview people, so go to the wineries and interview. But thus far, this has worked really well internationally to have it available like this and then market around internationally. And this has an audio component to it. I haven't worked with it yet, but it's possible that the audio component could be put into a podcast. I download the video and then I can check with the audio and talk with you about it and see if it could be put into a podcast. So how do you market your podcast?
Well, marketing is steady. It needs to podcast is not, as I said, it's not like Instagram or Twitter or YouTube. It's not really much algorithm yet. It's mostly word of mouth and people building. You have to build your audience slowly. You build your audience through word of mouth or tagging people, resharing. But yeah, that's how it grows. And for me, it has been a lot of work thanks to the guest I had and the marketing on my own social medias, and then directing the people from my social media to the podcast. And I usually send the people to iTunes because it's where most of the listeners are, or podcast listeners are. But as a product is growing, podcast until 2 or 3 years ago, nobody really knew what it was in Italy, and now is sort of becoming very popular. Radio station creating podcast, so in Europe is getting to a place, a very good place. So it hopefully will be like the States in a few years.
And I think for me, when I started doing this, so for example, I was teaching in Italy, so I was working in Italy and I came out and I was started being contacted from every country. And so I get spread around countries. So for example, I'll interview someone in South Africa and then they will spread me around to other people in South Africa, or I'll interview someone in the UK and they spread me around to people in the UK. So I'm continually busy. I always have someone new and different contacting me. So I'm booked for the next year. So I think this is just not going to end. But then I had someone in Oregon ask me if I could come out to the wineries and start interviewing people at the Oregon wineries. So I just need to find out about, and then, we can also go to conferences and things and set up so I was at a social media conference, and you can go to these conferences and interview people, and it'll show up on the screen overhead. So there's a lot of
Oh,
things like that I think are really interesting. So
yeah.
how often do you publish your broadcast, and when is it published?
So at the moment is published every other Friday. So twice every 2 weeks on the Friday. I'm going to release another 2 episodes, and then I'm going to take a month break of releasing because at the moment I've been working on the second season. So I've been recording now to be releasing the next episode in September. So I'm going to start again in September. I'm going to stop in middle of July, starting again in September. But yeah, then it will be again every two Friday. For me, it works. Balance is I can balance my work hours with the interviews and preparation, and make sure everything is up to the standard I want. So yeah, for me it's every 2 weeks, but there are people doing every week. People are once a month. It really depends on what is the topic and how many guests you can do, or what is the podcast is really broad. I think the last stats about 7 or 8 million podcasts now on iTunes. Most of them they started during the pandemic, and they only have like 4 or 5 episodes, and then they try it out and they die out. But yeah, it takes at least 10, 15 episodes to start getting into the sort of iTunes algorithm to before they start picking up, and then they need to know that you're active, you're actually doing it for something with a name. So that's iTunes and how it works.
Okay. And so who is your target audience, Mattia?
Well, my target audience, they are mostly wine professionals and students, for like advanced students, but also savvy wine drinkers. So someone is interested in wine and they want to learn about a specific topic. Because I cover specific topics in each episode, so I can, if someone is interested in something, they would find it and they would listen to it. So that's my aim. But a lot of my listeners are professional sommeliers and in the UK and not. But yeah, that's my target, and that's all who I'm aiming to target.
To target and learn from. So we wanted to talk a little bit about ageism in the wine industry. What are you finding that I talk to different people in different demographics. So I have a woman, Shayla, that started Black Girls Wine, and she felt that Black women were underrepresented in the wine industry. Some people think women are underrepresented in the wine industry. So do you want to talk a little bit about your experience with ageism?
Well, obviously, for me, as a white male, I don't have I don't I don't see I don't live through the ageism and the racism and the woman. So for me personally, it's always been about being quite a young age. I started in the wine industry when I was about 22, and I did quite steeply gone deep on my studies, and I've always been finding it quite intimidating getting into the writing part and the communication, which is very not controlled, but there is a lot of ideas that you have to have about 20, 30 years of experience before you know what you're talking about, which I don't personally think is true. I know a lot of people of my age, they know a lot about wine, and people who are double my age, and then probably they they say they know a lot about it. It's different. So that's a bit. It's not. ageism doesn't show as like it can be direct as or indirect as a sort of business. So as a sort of ideas of how the old wine business should run and who control it, and this is sort of how what I'm trying to go at. But yeah, there's a lot of other more direct and more prominent problems in definitely in the wine business for like racism and woman discrimination that there's more prominent.
Well, I found I was at a few years ago, I was at a social media summit and I was concerned, and this is what I found. So I've been in marketing my entire life. So I was marketing for a national corporation, and I was wondering if, well, all of the people at the social media summit would be young people. And then I was going to walk in and I was much older. But what happens is the older person runs the department, and then I'm able to direct younger people. So, for example, I would be an expert at digital and marketing strategy. So I'm able to direct younger people on the work as opposed to leaving them out. But I may have more experience than someone younger than myself. It's interesting to hear, but it sounds like right now you're in a position that a lot of people are lifting you up with your
Yeah.
with your podcast. So you're in a nice position with
Yeah.
people are including you and lifting you up. So I want to ask you quickly about I think this is funny for all of us international travelers. Let's talk a little bit about culture shock. So what are some of your funny experiences with culture shock?
Um
And I know an Italian living in the UK, there must be some.
yeah, I mean there has been some at first when I moved to UK, and still there's still some of the, especially during at work, some of the like being very polite at the old times in Italy. We don't really, especially at work, we don't really operate it that way, and asking permissions and these sort of things would be more shouty and just grabbing things if we need it. But definitely there was a shock at first, but I think I learned from that, and I think it's a very good habit. So I'm not gonna say it's not negative at all. But yes, culture shock, I think I experienced some when I was in traveling to. It wasn't like a shock, but I really found it interesting traveling to like Germany, to a wine region in Germany, and how is one of the main in Rheingau, one of the main wine region in the world in Germany, and it was how little in the villages you could find like in a wine bar and a wine shop, like people who knew about wine and what they were selling, even locally. And it was a bit of a shock. I was expecting a lot of wine bars and a lot of restaurants and selling all the best wine in the region, but there was none of that. And I found something similar in Spain. In Sherry, there was very much of a shock for me to see. There was no. I walked about 20 minutes to find a wine shop to buy some sherry there. So there was a bit of a shock, and I think it's down to the culture and how they present it.
One of my Italian ones was I was in Bassano del Grappa. So, for example, here when I leave the airport, there's a ticket machine, and there's either a person you hand your credit card to, or you put your credit card in the machine. So I was in Bassano del Grappa, and my assumption as an American that I'd get in the queue to leave, and then I pay when I left. Except there was a sign in Italian that said, "Pay over here across the street." So I couldn't read it. So I got in the queue to leave, and there were 12 Italian cars behind me. And I found there was nowhere to pay. I had to have a ticket from this machine that was across the street. So I had to get out of my car and try to say in Italian, "Excuse me, I need to get out of the queue. Apparently I don't have the ticket." So that was a learning experience. And I would also say I've been to Italy 12 times, but running through the train station in trying to catch a train in Venice, running through without your stamped ticket. Bad idea,
Yeah.
because you're in a hurry and you don't have time. So you're trying to get on the train before it starts going. And then you sit down and your ticket's not stamped. Yeah.
Yeah, that's
Bad
not a
idea.
good bad idea.
Not a good idea. Okay, so tell us real quickly, how do people find you on social media? I think I've got here is your hashtag for Twitter, but how do people find you on social media to listen to your podcast?
So at the moment on Instagram is Mattia underscore looking into wine. So that's on Instagram. On I use a lot of LinkedIn. So is Mattia Scarpazza. You find me there, and you get all the access. I probably should do like a page on Twitter, on Instagram, just for the podcast. We get around it and do that. But yeah, at the moment also Mattia Scarpazza on Twitter. And I have a website called Mattia Scarpazza, under my name, Mattia Scarpazza. You find all the articles I've wrote and the podcast as well there. And some things are coming up there as well, some guides and articles. So
Oh, wonderful. That's great to hear. Okay, so we'll talk a little bit. We'll just sort of close here. Mattia is an expert in wine and doing his own podcast, and I am doing a podcast. I am doing a live stream on Twitter and also on 5 different platforms. So the Time to Wine broadcast is on the second and fourth Monday of the month on Twitter, and I'm also posting that on Facebook as well. And people can answer questions there. The live stream interview is on the first and third Friday of the month at 11 a.m. Pacific Standard Time, and that will be on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, as well as Pinterest. So anyway, that's how you find us, and it was so nice to talk to you in the UK. So
thank you.
Ciao, ciao. I'll talk to you soon.
Thank you for having me here. It was a joy to be here and talk a bit about myself. It's different to be I'm usually the one asking questions, so it's nice.
I know, it's kind of fun when someone asks you. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.